Hello and welcome to the Centre for Brexit Studies YouTube channel. Today we're talking about our new PM on his first full official day as Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. We're joined by our Centre Director, Professor Alex de Ruyter, Chairman of UKIP Walsall and National Spokesman, Graham Eardley, and Beverley Nielsen, who has lots of different titles, Associate Professor at Birmingham City University's Idea Institute, Senior Fellow here at the Centre for Brexit Studies, and also Liberal Democrat Councillor on the Malvern Hills District Council. Now, of course, there's lots of opinions and views flying around at the moment about Boris Johnson, what we can expect from him as Prime Minister, as well as his cabinet, what he wants to get out of the role, and if he will be able to actually do the job that Theresa May was unable to do, which is, of course, leave the EU. So now we can officially say that Boris Johnson is our Prime Minister. What are your initial thoughts, and are you feeling positive or negative about this news? And Alex, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Beth. Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, much has been written about Boris Johnson already. He certainly has a colourful reputation. But in my view, I think, despite the rhetoric that he continues to utter around, full steam ahead, Brexit come on now, October the 31st, I do think that once he settles into the Prime Ministerial role and is confronted with the realities of the Brexit negotiation situation, that his tone will change. I've been consistent in that view for a while now, that I fully expect that he will be a lot more pragmatic in office, because he will be forced to be, than he has been on the campaign trail.
Graham?
I think that, going off what Alex said, he has got to deliver Brexit on the 31st of October. There's no two ways about it. We were promised Brexit on the 29th of March, then in April. Now we've got the 31st of October. He's got to deliver on that date up at the end of the Conservative Party. Boris knows this. He's been up and down the country. His members have known that. He's got a clear mandate, 66% of the Conservative Party members, to deliver Brexit. That's what he's promised, and that's what he must deliver.
I basically think that there's Boris the performer and Boris the manager, and I think Boris the performer has got to give the message that Graham has just given very clearly, because he's got to neutralise the Brexit party. Boris the manager has got to try to implement his stated goals, the do or die leaving on October the 31st. Naturally, as a Lib Dem, I'm horrified by that prospect. We are going to fight to remain at all costs as a party. That's what our leader Jo Swinson has stated. I think it's going to be an incredibly difficult balancing act. In fact, the bookies are suggesting the most likely outcome at this point is a second referendum. And so I think that what we'll find is that the balance of power in Parliament is too difficult to swing, even with an extreme right Brexit cabinet behind him, and that actually other options will have to come into play.
So in his speech outside Number 10 yesterday, Boris stated that the critics are wrong, saying the doubters, the doomsters and the gloomsters, they're going to get it wrong again. He also said there's no ifs or buts that the UK will leave the EU by the 31st of October. Do you think this is probably the most colourful kind of language we have ever seen from a Prime Minister? And do you think this is probably him trying to be almost kind of like a new breed of Prime Minister?
Oh, I think he certainly aspires to live up to his hero Winston Churchill's reputation for fiery rhetoric, but it's rhetoric in my view. And I just point out Beverley's comments there about Boris the performer. He's sort of backed himself into quite a corner with having to be seen to try and deliver Brexit, but one can very easily see a situation whereby he could campaign in another referendum and say that he would vote for leave and respect the result. No irony there, of course, but it's very interesting to think that that might well happen because of the parliamentary arithmetic and the polls continuing to suggest anything but a Tory majority government.
I think it's quite clever positioning that he's going for at the moment, because there is this rising nationalism in the country. Obviously the left behind, plus those who actually have always believed, the believers in Brexit. And the positioning is that we're the loyalists, the faithful, we don't doubt the ability of this country, we can do anything when we put our mind to it, we are the greatest kind of thing. I think he is playing the Boris Trump card when he's using that language. He probably has Trump in mind as a sort of role model, and certainly there seems to be some relationship between the two, but the realities of actually driving to that goal still remain in place. And I did have a sympathy with Corbyn when he said, you know, none of us actually underestimate this country, but perhaps the new Prime Minister overestimates his own capacity.
Graham?
You say colourful language from a leader. I mean, clearly you've not remembered Margaret Thatcher in a Bruges speech, for example, saying no to Jacques Delors as another example. So we've had quite colourful politicians and prime ministers in the past in senior roles. You can also go back, you say, to Winston Churchill, and even Harold Wilson, if you want to go and look at the other side, and Tony Blair, quite outspoken in certain aspects. We are used to people who can lead. That's what we have now got, a person who can and should lead. As far as we mentioned about the parliamentary arithmetic, I think Conservative members will be fearful of losing the whip, given the cabinet that is put in place and also the government that is put in place.
So Graham, you are chairman of UKIP Walsall. How do you think UKIP voters are feeling about Boris, and what impact will him as a Prime Minister have on UKIP as a party?
I think it'll be a positive one. I mean, he's putting the Brexit party to the sword. He really has party stance on the Brexit party's lawn at the moment. And we fish politically in the same pool as what the Brexit party do. Whereas UKIP has got more firm policies and can tackle the prime issue of immigration. Unfortunately, Boris doesn't seem to tackle like this, neither has Nigel Farage.
Beverley, your party has also had a new leader this week. The Lib Dems voted Jo Swinson as the new leader, Vince Cable's replacement, on Monday. So what is the general feeling amongst the Lib Dems around Boris Johnson as Prime Minister? And do you think this could actually give the Lib Dems a possible push in the next general election?
I think it already is. I mean, we've seen the latest YouGov polls this week, which have the Lib Dems in second place. So I think we're already seeing that actually the Tories have moved to the right. As Graham has said, they're sort of parking their tanks on the Brexit lawn. They have to do that. They have to neutralise the Brexit party, because if we have an election in the next 9 or so months, whenever it might come, they stand to lose so many seats if the Brexit party is strong against them, splitting the right vote. I think for the Lib Dems it's good news, frankly. I'm seeing signs already in my area, my part of the world, in Worcestershire, of moderate Tories coming and knocking on our door, and I think that trend is going to accelerate from here on in.
But that's an interesting point, though, isn't it? I think you've hit on the key issue here, which is that for the Conservative Party it would be, I don't want to say suicidal, but I think it would be extremely challenging to be forced into an election if they have not delivered Brexit. And for Johnson in Parliament, that is the biggest risk given that their effective majority is only 3 at the moment, and after the Brecon by-election next month, potentially 2, it would only take, 1 or 2 Tory MPs to cross the floor, of which a number are being alluded to be wanting to join the Lib Dems. If he is forced into an election before having delivered Brexit, I think that they will continue to hemorrhage votes to the likes of the Brexit party, because they will still be seen to have failed to deliver Brexit, I think. Whereas if he somehow gets a withdrawal agreement through Parliament, improbable as I think that is something he could take to the country.
Although there's a lot of political commentators today have said that, you know, with his cabinet appointees, he's definitely going for an election. I don't think myself. I mean, I look at the Labour side as well. There are enough Labour MPs to force things through. I think there's going to be about, 10, 12 Labour MPs who will already indicated that they are pro-Brexit and they will vote for a Brexit. Labour hasn't made its policy clear as of yet.
But that's the point, though, isn't it? Because they would want a withdrawal agreement, those Labour MPs. I don't think you would see any of them wanting a
Well,
no
Caroline
deal.
Flint said that if push comes to shove, she'd vote for no deal.
Not so sure. But,
so there's 1 or 2, if push comes to shove. perhaps Graham Stringer maybe putting I don't want to put words in his mouth because he's not here, but there are one or two, I'd say no more than 12 Labour MPs that may come to his rescue. Apart from that, Labour's in a mess. They don't want a general election at the moment, though they say they do. I think it would be suicidal.
No, I agree with you in that regard for the opposite reason, because they lack a clear sense on Brexit. Whereas the Brexit parties seem to be moving into their areas. I mean, Camilla Tonley says of an occasion which was in Pontefract during the European elections that Anne Widdecombe was getting great big cheers from working. But that comes back to the main point there, doesn't it? You have popularity for the Lib Dems in the polls on the one end of the spectrum, you have popularity for the Brexit party in the polls on the other, because the Brexit boil hasn't been lanced. And so those parties have the clearest stances on Brexit. As you both said, the Conservatives are now trying to neutralise that Brexit party threat. But until they, in my view, unless they can actually deliver Brexit, they won't overcome that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, is what I'm trying to say.
I
don't think there'll be an election either.
There is a risk that it might be forced into an election.
That's the point
which
I
is
was
the
trying
other
to make.
point. So I don't think they'll choose it, but I think it might happen.
So if it was a general election in the coming months, then would do you still think BoJo would still come out on top regardless?
Has it delivered Brexit or not? Are you saying the coming months? Do you mean after October 31st or?
I mean, who knows? There could be, a week or so before.
I come back to my previous point. I mean, trying to read which of the personas you identify, Boris the performer and Boris the manager, is really speaking here is to me is somewhat challenging. If they find themselves forced into an election before Brexit is delivered, he will go full bore in the manner that he is talking at the moment, because he has to. Now, I don't think that's enough of a vote winner. I think if a quarter of the populace are only supporting no deal, then to campaign on that platform is risky. The other point about a general election, as Theresa May discovered in 2017, is that in the 2 or 3 months of protracted campaigning, other issues do emerge.
Exactly.
So Alex, do you think with Boris as a Prime Minister then, can we still expect Brexit Party voters to stick with Brexit Party, or do you think they'll make their way over to the Tories?
Well, I think, to come back to what we've been saying in this conversation, that he is making a clear pitch for that vote. I'm not sure that would be enough to give them the majority they seek if they find themselves in the polls.
And Anoushka Rees-Mogg, who's the MEP for the East Midlands for the Brexit Party, has said that having Boris as the Prime Minister won't be enough, but that, until Brexit's delivered, and she's been quite clear on that, so that's the one indication of.
Okay, so let's discuss the new cabinet. So I think that the papers are calling what was yesterday a bloodbath amongst the Tories this week. Massive chunk of cabinet members have either resigned or been sacked and heading to the back benches, and they've been replaced by almost a whole new bunch. So we've got Sajid Javid as Chancellor, Priti Patel as Home Secretary, and Dominic Raab as Foreign Secretary. Do you think this is Boris's way of, being out with the old and in with the new? And will this be the cabinet which is actually going to get the UK out of the EU?
Well, he certainly, I think I'm still sort of saying that he's got to position it that way, and he couldn't have made a clearer statement about his positioning. He's picked those who have all along either been part of Vote Leave or campaigned to leave, and he has pulled them all together in a fairly extreme right-wing cabinet. And it is all part of that parking your tanks on the Brexit lawn, as Graham has articulated. He has to do that. He has to keep the Brexit party at bay, because, as I've said earlier, too many MPs' seats are at risk unless that happens. And that's even really safe seats like the one that I'm a PPC for in West Worcestershire, which has, 20,000 plus majority. If you split that vote in a shire seat like that, you could see a party coming through the middle like the Lib Dems, and it's too much to risk. So he has to do that in everything he says, in all the statements from now on in, because it's too much of a risk otherwise.
Alex?
Well, I think, as Beverley has pointed out, this is the master he's nailed himself to, and so in that sense he's rewarded those supporters with cabinet posts. as a cabinet, of course, you have to exert collective responsibility. So he's going to have that internal cohesion. Just the basic workings of the cabinet would be highly dysfunctional if you were to try and co-opt people who have very diametrically opposed views. So for that reason, the Philip Hammonds, the David Gawkes, were just not going to serve under him, irrespective of whether they've been given the choice. Will this be the cabinet to deliver Brexit? Oh, I'm going to stick my neck out and say I think no irony here. Well, probably lots of irony. This will probably be the cabinet that presides over another referendum, but not through its choice.
Graham?
I think they may be able to deliver Brexit. Looking at the cabinet and the makeup, you've got one member there, Priti Patel, who continually voted against the withdrawal agreement, whereas even Boris himself did, for one occasion, vote for the withdrawal agreement. You've got Saeed Javid, who was a Remainer, who sort of, in my opinion, floats with the wind on who's over there and how he can advance his position. So he may well get it through. I would be surprised. He seems very determined to get it through. As for Boris himself, I mean, when he was Mayor of London, he was very much a One Nation Conservative and sort of on the Liberal wing. So I think Boris has been given a job to do by his party. He understands the job he's got to do, and he seems pretty determined to deliver on that vote.
So, Priti Patel, there's been a fair amount of controversy around her promotion into the role of Home Secretary. So, what are your thoughts, Beverley?
Well, clearly it is a worry, having somebody who has actually openly stated that they are in favour of the death penalty. It's not something that I would see as a positive move or something that takes forward the cause of democracy in Great Britain. And I don't think it even particularly protects our citizens, actually. If anything, I think it puts at risk a number of citizens. We've seen a lot about the diversity of our prison population, the huge preponderance of those from BAME communities in prison. So I would fear a rise in injustice, even driven by the notion of such a thing. I think somebody who sort of went on holiday to Israel and just happened to meet the PM, Netanyahu, have a little casual chat on holiday about sorting out the Middle East, again seems rather sort of beyond entrepreneurial, I would suggest, and I'd be a bit worried about that. So I think it's, in civil service language, very brave.
So in his speech yesterday, Boris was keen to shout about the fact that he wants to get 20,000 more police on the streets, ensure there's enough money for the NHS, and he also wants to fix the crisis in social care once and for all. So can we expect Boris to get straight into these promises, or is it all going to be about Brexit for the next few months? And if so, could this just be Theresa May 2.0? Alex?
Well, good question. I actually think that when he makes those statements, he would be quite prepared to go through and engage in deficit spending, as it were, and ratchet up the budget deficit. He would be quite happy to do that. It's classic Republican strategy in the United States. They call it supply-side economics. Basically just cut taxes, increase spending, then the deficit blow out, and when it becomes unsustainable, the Labour Party win government and they have to clean up the mess.
I think the word you have to, Alex, is pork barrel rather than supply side.
It's a more prosaic term, yes. But in the 80s they talked about supply side economics, Graham. But yeah, I mean, you could well say that. But look, is that fiscally responsible? No. You come back to the no deal scenario with the Office for Budget Responsibility estimates suggesting would increase government borrowing by 30 billion. He would just have to. And then, this is the Liberal Boris trying to say he's going to deliver on the league promises to fix up the NHS, or police on the beat, reverse all these cuts, and have tax cuts for the rich at the same time. I wouldn't say they were responsible promises, but I think that in his mind he would seem somehow delivering them.
Yes, I mean, I think it is again where you sort of have to be very careful that you don't fall into the trap of looking as though you're betting against the nation, because I think that's where he has actually set up quite a clever sort of language around this, So yes, we must be responsible, but responsible mustn't mean lacking in ability to take forward agendas that actually for years and years have needed to be taken forward and haven't been. So I think in that sense, again, I think he's positioning himself to the audience, the core audience that he needs to target. But I do think in this instance, we're not seeing any numbers, we're seeing a lot of posturing, a lot of language around very important issues that supposedly are not beyond the wit of mankind, but actually haven't so far been tackled. And I'd like to see the detail as soon as possible on these things.
And finally then, what would you actually like to see from Boris as a Prime Minister? And do you think there's a particular aspect of his new role that you'll be particularly keeping your eye on, or is it really all about Brexit?
This is the thing, though, isn't it? What would I like to see about him as a Prime Minister? Well, I must confess that I actually found him funny on Have I Got News for You. But this is the whole point about the appeal of Boris, and Boris the performer. I want to see more of Boris the manager is what I actually want to see.
No, absolutely, and he can manage. I mean, we've seen that he does appeal to people. He did win 2 elections as Mayor of London.
But I still think that's Boris the performer.
Yeah.
You talk about the water cannons.
It is.
Spend money on it. That,
exactly.
The bridge volume.
There were mistakes. Exactly. There were mistakes. I mean, it is a most challenging hand that he has.
I actually think you can be that type of individual if you surround yourself with strong deputies who have an attention to detail.
But have we seen that?
I'm not so sure.
Grant?
I'd like to see him bring some gravitas to the role, which I think is perhaps beyond him. I'd like to see him conduct himself better on the world stage. Mind you, that hasn't done Trump to any harm so far. Really, I'd have thought.
Trump is leader of the United States. The United States leader can behave that way because it's the United States.
Yeah, well, I think Boris thinks the same for the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the way he has started quite clearly. I'd like to think that he will obviously deliver Brexit on the 31st of October and put the Brexit part to bed. Then that will give my own party a bit more of a chance, I would argue. And I'd like him to carry on a lot of the way he has done with the ministerial appointments, particularly people like my good friend Priti Patel.
But how do you as a party, if you can permit me asking the question, overcome the Brexit party challenge?
This side of Brexit being delivered by the Conservatives? The short answer is we don't, but once the Brexit has been delivered, then people are going to say, well, what's the point of the Brexit party?
Well, they might also say about UKIP.
Yeah, but we've got a load of other policies on immigration, on looking at the Islamification of Britain, and 1 or 2 other policies that we think really do go there. We look at the economics policy. Yes, we want to also ban HS2, which Boris hasn't been that clear on. So, we've got an old gamut of education policies, etc., etc. So that's how we do it, but we can't do it unless I think Brexit is finally delivered on the 31st of October. At the moment, we just keep our head down, so as I've said in the previous blog, wear tin hats and keep in the bunker for the moment.
I certainly wouldn't like him to see him deliver a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, because for the West Midlands it's going to be a total disaster with our automotive and aerospace and engineering sector, which is not at all set up. I mean, we spent 45 years with an integrated supply chain, frictionless and so forth, and now we're suddenly coming up with a new business model, which we haven't prepared for. Most of the businesses that I work with, that's sort of 99% of the business population is an SME. There is really nothing they can do. They will just be suffering from a seismic shock if this Brexit goes ahead on the 31st of October, which looks increasingly, it has to be a no deal because the EU are saying we're not going to budge.
I don't know so much about this. I mean, you look at what Ireland's been saying. Ireland seems to be wavering an awful lot at the moment.
I haven't heard any wavering. I saw Leo Varadkar yesterday. He wasn't wavering at all. He was quite clear. No move on the backstop.
That's the signals that are going out. Sorry.
I don't think the cultural elements, Graham, would be a vote winner personally.
I know that Katja Adler was saying yesterday on the news that there was a little bit of movement on the withdrawal agreement and the backstop and so forth. But when I saw Leo Varadkar on the news yesterday, it was absolutely clear this is it. We're not moving. So I don't know the answer to that question, of course, personally, but I think that it is going to prove very difficult. And if we have a no-deal Brexit here in the West Midlands, we are confronting a major disaster, and no amount of money, 2 billion apparently Andy Street is calling for to ameliorate the impact of that, is going to ameliorate it.
Thank you, Alex, Graham and Beverley, for joining us on a week that is no doubt somewhat of a historic time. We will see what happens next, but it's bound to be a very interesting few months.